Hello, welcome to End or End Gauge Model Railway. In my previous Scenic update I had built almost all of the land linking the middle mount to the removable section of hill at the end of the layout. There was still a little gap in the land over the area where the rod for point motor number 9 comes out. I plugged that using a chunk of insulation foam and blended the shape into the nearby land using toilet paper soaked in plaster. This time around I didn't measure the plaster and mortar. Having done it a couple of times recently I was able to estimate it by eye, though I could probably do with buying some weighing scales to live in the railway room for future. That needed to dry, but I still had time and enthusiasm for railway hobby activities and returned to my ballast comparisons. Whilst buying other things from model shops online, I had found two more ballast products that were marketed as suitable for N-Gauge, Gagemaster Scenics and Legacy models. The Legacy ballast poured easily and under casual observation looked pretty small, though I did later notice that there seemed to be a greater variety of sizes in the container than I had extracted for this experiment, so I don't know how representative my little trial will be. The Gagemaster ballast practically sprang forth from its bag. It's comparatively difficult to spread because it seems more gritty and prone to pinging off. These ballasts are quite a different shade to the others I've got. Neither of them are shades I'd particularly want to use on Endor. The Legacy one is quite brown and the Gagemaster one is quite dark. I think their ranges do have more colour options, they just weren't in stock when I was shopping. Although by this point I had some ballast magic that I could have used in this small area, I used diluted PVA glue again for the sake of direct comparison with the previous ballast samples. Although I mixed a small amount, there was still a reasonable amount of diluted PVA left over, so I thought I'd see what it would be like pouring it on a layer of scatter to try and lock that layer of scatter in place. I didn't mist the area with water first, so the glue ran down the land in little streams, but it did still seem to soak in horizontally after a few seconds. Before making any more land formations, I needed to decide on the exact dimensions and appearance of tunnel portals. For several years I've had a pair of Pico tunnel portals, but on the curve they're not wide enough to accommodate the overhang on all rolling stock, so I decided to try making my own from card and paper. I did some internet image searches for Great Western Railway area tunnels and had a look through various books I've already got, and concluded there isn't any particular style associated with the GWR, which gives me relatively free rein. Most of the tunnel portals are made from engineering bricks. Here are two examples, Dinmore and Sapperton. These photos are from the Network Rail Media Centre, so are okay for me to show. I decided this was the kind of look I wanted, with straight sides and, as with the Sapperton example, a curve to the arch that's shallower than a circle. I also have my own photos of Kennaway Tunnel, which also has straight sides and an even shallower curve to its arch. Having measured a width with a safe looking gap and a minimum height from the baseboard, I set about making a basic shape using Inkscape. I printed just the outline of the tunnel shape to start with so I could easily test the clearances without wasting lots of ink, and tweak the shape until I had something I liked the look of and which seemed to allow enough clearance. I know from past experience that Mark III coaches have the biggest horizontal clearance needs of all my rolling stock. They were what determined the space between the inner and outer loops of track. I haven't yet tried any other items for vertical clearance, but with straight sides to the portal I have the option of easily raising them a bit if needed. I would obviously need a brick texture for the final model, and whilst there are textures available to download, or to buy already printed, they often seem to have repeating patterns. Our brains are very good at spotting repeating visual patterns, so I thought I'd have a go at making my own textures. I've been using Inkscape for several years, mainly for diagrams and other graphics in videos on this channel, but I hadn't used it to make buildings or textures before. I knew the shape of engineering bricks would be fairly easy to draw, but I wanted to randomly vary their colours. Inkscape saves data in a standard file format called Scalable Vector Graphics. You can view these directly in a web browser, and they can be used as part of web pages. But more generally, these files are actually using a data format called XML, which is made from human-readable text. Text data is easy to work with, so I wondered if I'd be able to write a simple bit of code to modify an Inkscape drawing by randomizing the colours of bricks in it. As a quick experiment in Inkscape, I drew some rectangles, gave them a grey colour, then in the Layers view named each of them brick and saved the file. I then opened that file in a text editor and searched for the word brick and found how these shapes are defined. Each of them had a fill attribute with its red, green, blue colour levels in hexadecimal format, which is a very common format to work with. I edited that to give them new colours, saved the file, and then back in Inkscape reloaded the file and the bricks changed colour. Success! I then drew a page full of bricks. It takes a while to get a few bricks in place to start with, but by repeatedly grouping everything so far and then copy and pasting, it gets exponentially faster to cover an area. I filled the area of an A4 sheet of paper, which resulted in more than 94,000 individual bricks. Next, in a different Inkscape file, I chose several shades of colour that I'd like to be part of the texture. Inkscape shows they are red, green, blue values along with the level of transparency. I copied those values. I then wrote a short program into which I added these new colour values along with a relative probability that each one should be chosen, and made it rewrite the SVG file, assigning these colours at random. This code is relying on the fact that I'm the only person supplying the input and that I'm in full control of that input, so please don't take it as an example of secure or robust programming. This worked. It produced a copy of the file that had randomised brick colours, but I didn't like the mix of colours, so spent a little while experimenting with which shades were allowed and their probabilities of being chosen. There are plenty of improvements I can think of making to this, but I could end up spending a lot of time on them, so I decided it would be good enough for now. There were also issues with having so many objects in the SVG file. Inkscape slowed down a lot and became prone to crashing, so I exported the page to a more traditional image file format called Portable Network Graphics, which made the data less flexible but easier for the computer to draw. I then used that brick texture image as part of a tunnel portal drawing. I drew stones for the arch and set their colours manually, since there weren't many of them, to give some variation but keeping them a more consistent colour than the bricks. I wasn't sure what these would actually look like once printed, so before putting time into any more details I did a test print on relatively cheap paper with standard print settings. The results aren't amazing. The definition of the mortar lines isn't as good as on the computer screen, and the printer hasn't been entirely consistent, leading to some noticeably different sections in the texture, but it was good enough to carry on. Using high-quality paper and high-quality print settings should bring much better results, but I'll wait until I've got a more refined set of textures and shapes before spending more money on paper and ink. I stuck the printout onto 2mm greyboard using thinly spread PVA glue. It's very sturdy, but the 2mm greyboard was hard to cut, so I ordered some thinner card for easier and more accurate cutting. In the railway room, the overall brick colour looks much more blue than on my computer screen or in natural light, so I may need to tweak the colours a bit to get something that's the shade I want. Next for this portal I made an experimental wing wall. Getting an overall shape was easy, but the edge that joins the main portal wall needed to be cut at an angle through the greyboard. I forgot about that to start with, so tried to carve and file an angle into it afterwards. I also forgot to print enough brick texture to wrap around the edges of the wing wall, and didn't perfectly align what I'd printed, so that's going to need another attempt. Because the wing wall texture was small, I printed that in high quality, but the only noticeable difference in the end result was a lack of bad patches. On the whole, the bricks and mortar lines between them didn't really look any different to standard quality. The overall look to the main portal was too flat, so I needed to add some depth to the texture somehow. Most tunnel portals have extra details, like a course of bricks that sticks out, or bits that look like pillars, as well as have a line of capping stones or bricks. The thinner card I ordered was a lot thinner than I'd been expecting, so I measured it with some digital calipers, and actually it's close to 0.5mm. The thicker greyboard with a layer of self-adhesive paper on it is around 2.1mm, but I'd been thinking it was 1mm greyboard rather than 2. Perhaps some 1mm greyboard would be worth getting. I used 2 layers of the 0.5mm card with an offcut of texture to make a shallow pillar, and stuck that on. For now, that's all I've done with the portal, but I'm finding it fun to make, so I'll do a bit more every so often. Back to Ballast. Having had plenty of time to dry, I think both have stayed a very similar colour to how they started off, so having tried 6 different options in total, it seems safe to say that model railway ballasts hold their colour after being glued. Neither the Legacy nor Gagemaster N-Gauge ballasts are particularly fine, and the Gagemaster one has a very bad speckled look. It makes it look like the ballast has had random chunks of coal mixed into it. The Legacy ballast has some strange colours and sizes in the mix, so I don't think either of these are good options. When looking through pictures of the railways in the first few decades of the 20th century, I thought it seemed very common for the ballast to be much finer than it is these days. This photo is from the South Devon Railway at Buckfastleigh, and I think it's closer to what I've been seeing in old photos. To that end, I've bought some much finer sieves to see how much of the chinchilla sand could be used for this. Sadly, it's not very much at all. The vast majority of the pieces are too big. This sieve has apertures of 0.3mm, which equates to about 4.5cm at full scale. I think even that is relatively large, but I don't want to waste a lot of the chinchilla sand, so I might see about getting slightly larger aperture sieves. The leftover ballast glue that I put on the hillside has dried clear and I can't see where it was put, but there are sections that feel harder now, so it seems to be a viable way of making the scatter much more secure. That's as far as I've got for now. It's been a few months since trains have run on this layout, apart from a tiny bit of testing after ballasting, but I want it back in good working order before any of my pre-ordered locomotives arrive. So far, that's proven to be a moving target, especially for the Dapol Class 56, apparently still expected Q1 2026, so by the end of March. I've written a little program to check the Rails of Sheffield website for models I've got on pre-order. We'll see what actually happens, but as soon as any of them are announced as being available imminently, I'll be clearing up and pausing Scenic work. That's all for now. Bye bye!